This is the story of Lyn Burton. Lyn is president and executive director of Affordable Housing Connections. Lyn, how do you, as a compliance agency, help the industry reduce stress and anxiety in affordable housing when the rules aren't clear? And what happens to compliance when the rules have all changed, at least temporarily? Do you want to tell us a little bit about this and give us some advice?
Well, thank you, Nan, for the opportunity to have this discussion. I fall back on the old Airline Wisdom, which is in the sudden event of loss of cabin pressure, put your own mask on before you lean over and help someone else put theirs on. So with that analogy in mind, I would say that the first step that we have undertaken is, as a staff, to figure out how to manage our own anxiety. And that in turn has given us some ideas about how we can better assist the property managers and the small MAPA owners of affordable housing projects in our workload, primarily in the metropolitan areas of the state of Minnesota, but also in small towns in greater Minnesota. So some of these techniques are ones that are applicable within organizations, as well as the ones that we've applied to ourselves. So first, we needed to talk about the stress we were feeling. This touched everyone's life. And all of a sudden, people couldn't come to work. We have been under work at home requirements from the governor of the state of Minnesota for almost a month. And the stay-at-home orders will not be relaxed until at least the first part of May. And if the COVID cases keep rising and the morbidity rates keep rising, it is possible that that stay-at-home will be extended. So our first challenge was, how do we help our own employees deal with the stress they're feeling at home, because they're going to have to work at home. And they're going to have to work at home with daycare centers closed and schools closed. And in many cases, a spouse, a partner, also having a job loss. So the huge amount of stress just at the staff level. So one of the first things we did is I got on the phone one by one, every single staff person, and let them talk. It was important to deal with their emotional state of being. This is not about how smart you are, how much technical knowledge you have, how good a trainer you are. This is about your feelings. And if you're feeling out of control and you're feeling acute anxiety about the people in your immediate life, you're not productive in a work context. So as a sensible manager, that was my first task, is to just check in. Emotional state of being, how are you doing, what's going on with the family, how are you managing, any crises I should know about, any life change issues I should know about, anybody sick in your household, that kind of thing. Second was, how do we adapt how we do our work to a work from home environment? We were fortunate in that several years ago, we started adapting our normal work processes to allow remote access to a central server and to a central database. So that was really a godsend and a blessing that we had that fundamental infrastructure in place. We are finding that many of our local government partners and our property management companies simply don't have that technological capacity in place. So that for us was really a blessing, is that we could, with modest tweaking, getting our IT people involved and the Comcast phone system people involved, we could tweak things around so that every individual could manage from their home, regardless of where they live geographically. The third thing is to reduce anxiety ourselves. We needed to look honestly at our workload and ask ourselves what is doable right now, what is not doable, what has to be done, what can be done later. And it meant completely reorganizing the focus of how we do our work. And at that point, taking stock and just letting go, because that in and of itself, to say, for high achievers, for people who are driven by high competencies, to let something go is really hard. But once that was done, then we could catch our breath and start asking those same questions of our city contacts, especially starting with our very large management companies that have portfolio across the country. How are you doing? What is happening in your work world? How are you dealing with tenant issues? We spend so much time in our business trying to help management companies build community. All of a sudden, what happens when the community is told, don't talk to each other, don't socialize, you can't use a community room. You have to check out in advance whether you can use a laundry facility, and you can only use it under certain health protocols. What happens when you are a property manager and you cannot inspect a unit because the family is required to stay at home? And if you have your own maintenance crew go in, there are health and safety risks big time with COVID, which now we know can spread without, people can be asymptomatic and spread. So there are all those issues that we've been talking through with our property managers, with our city clients, with our county agencies. And that's also meant that we've been looking desperately for guidance from the federal government, much of which has not been forthcoming. HUD recently, but not at the beginning, HUD recently has started issuing some forms of guidance for primarily Section 8 and public housing programs. So on the tax credit side, we've been looking to guidance from HUD through those programs and trying to work backwards to what might be applicable on the Section 42 side, so that we can help managers deal with really tough situations of how to qualify a household, how to document qualifications, because the implications, again, for having someone move in who is over income for an initially leased up tax credit unit means that you could disqualify that unit for credits forever, if not for several years, because you can't evict someone who's been operating in good faith. So we've been designing our own Q&A processes, trying to get those out weekly, setting up webinars, setting up Zoom sessions, whatever it takes, a lot of phone advisories, bending over backwards to volunteer upfront reviews if necessary, particularly problematic case files, and saying to them, you can't simply on a blanket basis let anybody in. On the other hand, here are some techniques that you can use in order to document your best faith efforts, so that you're not, on the other hand, preventing someone who probably 98% is likely to be eligible, because you don't want to deny housing to people who desperately need it. So trying to get those protocols and processes in place, that has been really, we hear back, helpful for these management companies. And then checking in again with our city partners and making sure they're getting copies of all the communications we're doing, and asking them, I weekly check in, do you need anything from us? What can we do to help you, so that we're fielding more of the calls that otherwise would be coming to you directly, so that we can help keep their workload focused on the priorities that the city has to do, which is get these new pipeline projects through, get them funded, so that the developers and the managers have their certificates of occupancy and can start leasing up these incredibly valuable resources. We're also in partnership with a number of our nonprofit agencies and state agency, Minnesota Housing Finance, around issues of how to use vacant units or vacant properties for at least temporary relief for those people experiencing homelessness, which is a big issue nationwide, and certainly also here in Minnesota.
We may have a lot of people that don't realize that we are one of the workers that are essential workers in housing. That we don't have the luxury, in a sense, or the penalty, whichever way you want to look at it,
Mm-hmm.
of simply staying home and not working.
Oh, yes, good point. Absolutely good point. Yeah, everyone on our staff is deemed to be an essential worker, which is why it's been very important for us to protect our funding lines, to make sure that we always can make payroll, that we don't have any level of anxiety in our workforce. Because in I would say right now about a quarter of the cases, there is the individual who works for us is the main source of income at this point in time. And just how people handle that level of stress. Schools will not reopen this term. We were notified of that today. So these families with younger children, as we move towards generational transition in workforce, we have a number of single parent heads of household with several children, ranging from daycare age to high school age, and how they manage to get their work done and take care of children and take care of everybody in their extended families, again, is an extremely high stress environment. So that multiply that then out through our case workload. We have one of the properties in our portfolio is a property called Riverside Plaza, 1,303 units of rental housing in 6 high-rise buildings, 1,200 of which directly are assisted with the low-income housing tax credit. And throughout that property, there are at least 850 units assisted in one form or another with Section 8. Typical unit family size is 4. Do the multiplication. Think about all of those families now stay at home and what the implications are for property management. It's horrific. So again, we're trying to do our best to stay in touch, to be the shoulder that is safe for a property manager to, if they need to cry on our shoulder. We're open to that, to make sure they know that we understand their stress, that we will do what we can to backstop them, to make sure their paperwork will be as close to bulletproof even after the fact as we possibly can make it, because their job is to protect the occupancy, to keep the cash flow going for the property, to make sure people are living there and not out on the streets experiencing homelessness, but also to protect the integrity of the tax credit or subsidy source that's coming in. It's a very, very challenging job for them.
Well, thank you so much, Lyn, for giving us, your thoughts and advice and into this niche industry in a sense, but one that just affects and touches so many people. For yourself, have you got any little tidbits of advice to give on a personal level?
I try to remember to breathe regularly. I'm serious. Breathing out is really important. We're those of us who are stress managers tend to hold our breath, right? It's really just to breathe out, whether you want to call that yoga or whatever. I garden, which is really important springtime in Minnesota, to go out and clean a little bit of leaf mold off the hyacinth that are trying their best to come up and not be rabbit fodder or lettuce chomping for breakfast for them. I stay in touch with family. I got to watch one of my little grandbabies, my grandson, take his first steps with FaceTime. It's not as satisfying as letting that little guy run into my arms and fall into me, but it'll have to do for the moment. And staying in touch that way, I think, is important for each of us. It reminds us that we are part of extended family. We all are interconnected, and our well-being helps the well-being of one another, and that, I believe, is what's going to get us through this.
Thank you so much, Lyn.
My pleasure, Nan. You stay safe, stay healthy, and keep on doing everything you're doing. You're amazing.